Greetings, fellow Watford fans. Omar here with another edition of the Orns 10-minute take on Watford nil, Brighton 2. Another disappointing home performance for the Hornets on the back of last month's debacle against Norwich. Watford come out again and do not do enough, not nearly enough, to stifle Brighton as Brighton take all 3 points away from the Vic. Watford in this must-win relegation scrap are not winning, and worse than that, they're not scoring. That is very troubling. Josh King starting again today, but not effective enough for me. Emmanuel Dennis not doing the simple things. He's trying to make things too difficult for himself and his teammates in key areas of the pitch, and a number of opportunities today that he could have had, but just did not take them soon enough and tried to be too much of a fancy player in a league that you can't be fancy in unless you are a Manchester City or Liverpool. You cannot get away with these flick passes and tricks and things like that in the league when you are in the bottom two, as Watford are. It is all hands to the bump and all hands on deck, all hands on the pump to get this team to start to score goals, let alone start winning. And right now, not a pretty picture at the Vic. The fans very apprehensive. You could feel it all the way from here in San Francisco, California. The fans were sitting on their hands at the Vic. The atmosphere was not good. And when they all saw Neil Mopay's volley into the back of the Watford net, the things really started to get ugly at Watford as some of the fans really cursed the players. From what I know, what I've learned from some of the fans who were at the game, Watford fans not happy, and rightly so, with the way the team is playing. Roy Hodgson, for me, should have started João Pedro up top with Emmanuel Dennis. João Pedro is the only one who scored this calendar year for Watford so far, and I think the team needs some life, and they needed to have it in the beginning of the game, not in the second half of the game when the game was pretty much halfway over. Lauza did not start the game, but he did come in at the beginning of the second half. Well, he should have started, shouldn't he, in that midfield? And that may have sparked Watford into something more significant earlier in the game rather than the desperation tactics at the end. Watford needed to be desperate at the beginning of this game with all that was at stake, with the predicament as it is for our club. This team needed to mirror that kind of desperation with an intensity and a desire and a passion and an aggression. Instead, they lacked that throughout this game, except for a few moments in the second half when there was only one shot on target for the entire game for Watford, as best as I can recollect. One shot on target, no goals scored, and two goals conceded. That is simply not good enough at this rate to keep you in this Premier League. However, I still believe that this team will stay in this division at the end of this season. And I know that sounds like a complete fantasy at this point, but I do believe in this team, and I do believe that Roy Hodgson will turn this troubled ship around. There are 7 very winnable home games in this campaign for Watford: Burnley, Everton, Leeds. Surely we can take 3 points in each of those games. I mean, my goodness me, that's 9 points. And then we've got at home as well teams like Leicester City, teams like the likes of an Arsenal. Difficult, but not impossible there. And also, we've got Crystal Palace. That's the next home game coming up on the 23rd of February. This game against Brighton, though, the big mistake in it in the first half was the usually excellent Hassan Kamara giving too much space to Tariq Lampy on that right side, and he crossed the ball in, and it found Neil Mopay, who volleyed the ball into the back of the net. If Hassan Kamara had got just a little bit closer, just a bit closer, a lot closer to Lamptey, that ball would not have been crossed in. And normally Hassan Kamara has that ball covered, but not on that instance. Otherwise, he had a very good game, as did Samir and Cathcart. That central defensive pairing for me works. Keep it for the rest of the season. Keep that back line the way it is, as far as I'm concerned. What the problems now are very clearly, now that Roy has at least that back four settled, is that midfield needs to be shaken up. Lauza has to start these games now. We need someone who's got a creativity and a forward-thinking spark, and that is Lauza. Lauza showed you that in the second half today, and he was very active on the ball, created things, started that pitch moving, started those Watford players moving up the pitch. An essential thing to do in these games where you are fighting for your life in the Premier League. You cannot rely on a 4-4-2 anymore now. Now that we've established the back, and the back has performed well, I think that the onus now is to change that midfield up and change that forward line, change that formation from a 4-4-2 now to a 4-3-3 in these games. It is critical now. Obviously, against teams that are up the very top of the table, the other end, like a Liverpool, like a Chelsea, and like a Manchester City. All of those teams we have to visit in these remaining away games. Absolutely, you're going to play a little bit differently. But when you're dealing with these teams, especially at home, very winnable games, like a game against Burnley, like a game against Crystal Palace, like a game against Leeds, like a game against Everton, you will have to do these 4-3-3s. I think that 4-3-3 is going to be your way out of this, and put Lauza in that midfield, and you have the top three, the forward three of Dennis on the left. And you would have someone like João Pedro, because I think you really have to start him now, and you have Sarr on the right. That is where you're going to have to go here for your starting three in that 4-3-3, and have Dennis drift in and penetrate into the box. Stop trying to do fancy passes along the 18-yard box. Drive into the box, try to make something happen, sting the palms of the goalkeeper, and stay aggressive so any rebound or ricochet can come straight to another Watford player. Today's game, the big problem for me in going up front with Dennis is that Dennis did not create enough running space for these crosses to come in from Femenia. So when Femenia was driving down the right, neither he being Dennis nor Josh King were creating enough movement so that Femenia could cross that ball in quickly, knowing that the ball was coming in. These strikers, and they're not really strikers, are they, in terms of Josh King? They have to be more aggressive. Josh King has to be more assertive. He has got to demand the ball. I mean, this is what's got to happen. If you're going to stick with Josh King, and would advise against it for now, you've got to be able to be more assertive as a forward player. You've got to demand the ball. You've got to run in space for the ball. It's not happening, is it? And then when the outlet ball goes to Dennis on the left, he is not doing what is required. He's dribbling too much. This is exactly what Claudio Ranieri said. He didn't name Dennis, but clearly that's who he was talking about. We've got players here who don't want to take on my philosophy. They're more interested in dribbling the ball and keeping possession than they are taking a shot and driving the ball. And that's what you saw today from Dennis. He was dribbling and dribbling and dribbling and trying to do so much. The game to me has gone away from Dennis for the last few. Josh King has not been there. I mean, Josh King has not been there, has he? He has not scored since November the 28th. We need to have players who want this ball in the back of the net, and they're going to have to fight for it. Fight for that shirt. Play with some urgency. For God's sake, man, we have 15 games in this Premier League season to get it right. And really, we only have the next three too, because the games are going to start to get tough again. We've got to go away at Liverpool. We've got to go away at Manchester United, pardon me, at the end of this month of February. And not too long from now, we're going to be at Etihad. And we know what the Etihad is for us. It's a nightmare. And the way we are playing right now, we are putting ourselves closer and closer and closer to championship football. There's got to be some urgency from this team. There has to be an urgency and a passion. And Roy Hodgson can't get on the pitch and do it for you. So with Ismaila Sarr starting next week against Aston Villa at Villa Park, I have a lot more hope. I had hope from the start of the season. I still do. I still think this team's staying up. And even though it seems bleak, and I know a number of Watford supporters now are completely having this team in the championship next season, they are totally, and I've spoken to several of them, and they totally think that this team is done and dusted and heading straight for the championship. But I don't think that's the thing right now. I don't think that's happening. I think that what Roy Hodgson will do in the next few weeks is have this team turned around. But I think to do that, he's got to change his formation. Got to do that now. You can't be at home in home games thinking, oh, I'll just sit back for a half and then in the second half, I'll go for it. No, you are at home. And when you are at home, you go for it, hammer and tongs from the off, from that first whistle, from the off. You go for it. You do not say, I'm going to sit back for 45 minutes. Because if they had started this game with Lauza, if they had started this game with João Pedro up top with Dennis, you would have had a much more lively attacking game. And you would have had much more chances. I'm telling you, you would have. And that crowd, all that half, sitting on its hands, waiting for Brighton to score, really. And then the Boo Birds are out. You know, people were upset, rightly so. You can't play into negative or overly defensive football. I understand it's important to get the balance right, and Roy has been starting to do that. But these goals that were conceded today were very poor concessions. And this team now has to get on its bike, not feel sorry for itself, and they've got to change the dynamic because right now this team is on a one-way express ticket to the championship. This has been the Orns 10-minute take.